So let's dive right into what is going on right now in Israel. It's a really intriguing situation. There's a battle over judicial reform. Can you take us through that discussion and what's happening right now?
Sure. I'll try to keep it simple because it is super complicated. Recently, there were elections in Israel, and the people voted for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And not only did he get a strong showing, but it was the most right wing coalition that Israel has ever had, right wing, conservative, and religious. And as a result, the media, which is super left wing, is coming down hard against Netanyahu. And they are using this issue of judicial reform as an excuse to basically attack Netanyahu and his government. So the judicial reform issue is basically something that Netanyahu campaigned upon, meaning that the people who elected him want to reform the judiciary, because in Israel you have a very strange situation where the Supreme Court is extremely left wing and has their own very strange rules. Like, for example, they are not elected by the legislature. They appoint themselves over and over again. There is no constitution, and so therefore they can interpret laws basically according to what they consider reasonable or not reasonable. But they don't represent the people. They're not elected, and as a result, there's a strong sense that we need to reform the judiciary, which is exactly what the Netanyahu government is looking to do.
Yeah, it's interesting because you have people on both sides of this. One side is essentially saying that making these reforms would obliterate the system of checks and balances. And the other side, in light of what you just described, is saying, no, actually, this helps. This actually creates a healthier system of checks and balances. And for Americans looking at this as outsiders, right, looking at how this works, I think a lot of people will be surprised to know that there is no official constitution and that the setup is how you've just described. Why do you believe this is something that Christians in particular in America should care about?
Well, everything that happens in Israel, in one way or another, Christians should and do care about, because, after all, Jerusalem is the only place that the Bible demands our attention, requires us to pay attention. As it says in Psalms, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. We're supposed to pay attention to what's happening in Israel. And so Christians want to know that Israel is strong and Israel is secure, but also that Israel is following not only democratic principles, but the principles of the Bible. And I believe that judicial reform is necessary for Israel to not only be closer to the American system and therefore be more democratic, but also be aligned with the biblical principles.
Yeah, and just dig into this a little bit more, because I think people will find it interesting. You know, when there's a Supreme Court nominee who the president in the United States, you know, talking about the U.S. system, would nominate, you then go through hearings and all of that in Congress. Right now, if somebody wanted to end up on the Supreme Court in Israel, can you just, again, reaffirm what that process looks like so people can understand the difference?
So there is a committee of Supreme Court justices and also the Bar Association, the Israeli Bar Association, and they get to choose. And then the president of Israel, who's also not really an elected official, he's more of an honorary official, and he works with them to decide who could be on the Supreme Court. And so you have this sort of self-perpetuating group of extremely liberal judicial activists. And as the country becomes more and more conservative, so the Supreme Court is like this last bastion of liberal holdouts that are really acting to hold back the country and act in undemocratic kind of ways. And it plays itself out all the time. And it affects everything from the economy to social issues and, of course, to security.
Yeah, and when you look at this, you look at the reaction. I know there are a lot of protests right now in Israel over this. There's a lot, as you mentioned, happening in media. And by the way, you have a website, Israel 365, where you've written an op-ed on this, and you work daily to look at issues of what is happening in Israel. But why do you believe the reaction to this is so swift and severe and strong?
So it's the first time that you've had this very, conservative and religious government, and as a result, really the media is losing its mind, doesn't know what to do, and this is the first issue that Netanyahu's government campaigned for and is pushing for, and so they are organizing protests and rallies against a conservative government, against a religious government. And so it's just really divisive. And the media is sort of warning against civil war and at the same time seems to be instigating it and inciting exactly that. So it's a pretty hysterical time here. And we really do need some common sense to persevere, and for the leaders to compromise, negotiate if necessary, and to fulfill the will of the people.
Well, where can people go to find more information on you and on issues like this when it concerns Israel?
So, Israel 365 is a daily connection to Israel for Christians who are interested in what's happening here. And Israel 365 News is the latest news, and we always try to frame it from a biblical perspective. What we're trying to do now is organize a petition in order to encourage Prime Minister Netanyahu, Christians all over the world who want Israel to be both democratic and biblical, can sign that petition at our website at Israel365.com. And we're going to present all of those signatures to Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Well, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for joining us today. Looking forward to having you back again sometime soon.
Great talking to you, Billy.